Cool. So, hey guys, welcome to the SaaS Sessions podcast. I have two amazing guests with me here today. Morgan Ingram, who is who is a sales expert. He runs his own show called SDR Chronicles, and he empowers sales teams to become prospecting rock stars at J Barrows Consulting and Training. And Prakhar Jain, who is an associate director of sales here at Whatfix, and also a colleague of mine. Hey Morgan, hey Prakhar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for hosting us.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about, what types of sales is, best for any SaaS company. Is it inside sales or outside sale, or is it something different, right? But before, let's get to know a bit of our guests. And let's start with Morgan. So, Morgan, so how did you get into sales? And, you started as an SDR and now you're training other SDRs to become better at their jobs. So, tell us a bit about your journey.
Yeah. So what I've figured out is no person is growing up and they're like, man, I want to be in sales. Like, I don't think I've met a person that's been like, yo, I want to get in this. Like, I have not met that person yet.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, obviously that's not how I started. So I actually wanted to be a sports agent. And in that, I saw Jerry Maguire. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie before. And in that, it talks about being a sports agent, all that stuff. And I was like, that's me. So throughout college, throughout high school, that's all I cared about. And I got to the end of my college career and I realized it wasn't for me. They told me I had to go to law school and all this stuff I didn't want to do. So I was like, that's not happening. So I wanted to go into marketing and didn't get any marketing jobs. And so I actually wanted to work with a marketing company, but I found that the only way I could get there was by being an SDR. So I cold called the director of sales at the time. That cold call probably sounded terrible, but they let me in the interview. I don't even know how I even got there. And so now I'm there interviewing for an SDR role. I really have no idea what it's about and end up taking it. And so in that role, it was obviously setting meetings for those who get context, sales development rep, setting meetings, prospecting, cold calling. And in that, I struggled in the beginning a lot. And I learned over time as I got better and better that there was a process for success. And in that process, it got me excited because in sales, the more that you learn and the more that you grow, the more you can earn as a whole. And also you just become better as a person. And so in that's why I really have enjoyed sales so far. And that's what got me into it. And then from there started the SDR Chronicles, which you mentioned. And that bolstered my personal brand in my career. And then that's how John Barrows, who I work for today, found me and then brought me in to be a sales trainer. Teaching on prospecting and sales development is now what I've been doing for the past year and a half, 2 years. So that's like my backstory. That's where I'm coming from. And a lot of stuff that I talk about today are just best practices of what I've seen, what I've learned, and just mistakes that I've made across the way.
That's an amazing journey. I mean, you said like you didn't meet anyone who's, who are dive right into sales and who knows that they are made for sales, right? So that's an amazing thing. And what about you, Prakhar? How did you get into inside sales and now the associate director at Whatfix? Tell us a bit about your journey as well.
Yeah, sure. I think Morgan has laid it out really well because I can't, contradict him right here saying that I knew that I wanted to be in sales. I actually wanted to be a digital marketeer. The first job that I got into was after my MBA. So I completed my MBA as a gold medalist and, being to one of the, top tier 2 colleges based out of India, it was more around the jazz of being with startups. And I wanted to be a digital marketeer. That's how I started my journey. I joined Whatfix as the first employee. So it was just the founders. They sort of showed trust in me. And my CEO, Khadim, brainwashed me into sales. And he was like, no, you're a sales guy. And I was like, no, I'm not, because I think I'm good in marketing. But then, his entire idea was that, why don't you try this out and let's see if you like it. And, this is where I am today in the journey of 4.5 years in terms of, growing the company from 4 customers to 500 plus today, where 10% of Fortune 500 companies work with us, etc. But it's been one of a journey in terms of, I can't imagine myself today doing anything but it. It just has to be this. And I so much agree with Morgan that I never thought I would be a sales guy. So I fully agree with you that nobody knows that, right?
No, you don't. And there has to be, right? It's almost like you wish that you could have that as an option. Like, cause I didn't even know until like, I was like seeking it. And even today, like even being on podcasts and public speaking, I didn't even want to do that either. So it just, everything kind of cultivates together. And it's funny, like probably looking back at when you were like, what did you want to be when you grow up? Sales is probably the millionth thing on the last of the list there.
Sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's Prakhar and Morgan, guys. And so I don't want to keep the listeners waiting. So let's start dive into our topic, which is inside sales versus outside sales, and what should you guys do for your SaaS. So Morgan, can you tell us about what's the difference between inside sales and outside sales? How are these two different?
Yeah, I think it starts with the super high level that outside sales is a lot easier, right? Because you have face-to-face conversations, right? There's no one who can say like, oh, face-to-face conversations, like that's super hard. Like I can tell your language, I can tell your body language. If I'm saying something off, I can always switch. Like we
Mm-hmm.
obviously have video now with inside sales, but looking back at it, there wasn't video at some point, right? So it was obviously a lot harder to gauge tone and to get people's attention. So I say obviously outside sales, it more so leads to behaviors on body language and obviously meeting with that person face to face, right? It's a different way. And how
Mm-hmm.
your prospecting is different too, because you're at more events and things of that nature. So yeah, outside sales, face to face sales, obviously a lot easier. Inside sales is a lot more tough because you're dealing with everyone else who's doing inside sales, right? You're dealing with SDRs that are looking to make cold calls and emails. You're also dealing with tonality. You sometimes can't get that person on the phone, right? You have to negotiate sometimes via email because that person doesn't want to answer your phone call. So it's a little bit harder because you're dealing with multiple channels.
Mm-hmm.
Outside sales, you're doing so much face to face. If you have a problem, it's like, all right, let's have a face to face meeting, right? With an inside sales, it's just so much harder because of everything that's going on from the avenue standpoint. So I'm not saying that it's a walk in the park with that outside sales. That's not what I'm saying. But the distinction is that like, hey, look, I'm having face-to-face conversations and we're meeting at events versus I'm making cold calls and doing emails. And it's just a lot more different from that inside sales perspective. And also the type of people that are inside sales and outside sales is different as well, right? There's different ways you're going to go about that. The way that you're going to talk to people, conversations is different as well. So that's how I see the differences. I know obviously there'll be probably different insights across the board from different people here, but that's kind of how I see it.
Awesome. And anything to add there, Prakhar? I mean, I know that you're leading inside sales and you have done inside sales. So you have anything to add in terms of that?
No, I think I would agree with Morgan. In field sales or the outside sales, body language plays a huge role in terms of, just getting to know your buyer. You're
Mm-hmm.
pitching your solution, their body language clearly tells you how interested they are. You're asking the right questions, but if your product is not a fit, you clearly see that with their body language. You give them a
Mm-hmm.
licensing code, it clearly shows up on their face, whether it was a sticker shock or whether it's in line with their expectations. In inside
Mm-hmm.
sales, completely, you have video conferencing tools as well, but then a lot of times, like Morgan mentioned, in terms of SDR calling, etc., you're completely shooting in the dark, and it's definitely much harder, I see.
Awesome. That's interesting. So Morgan, we're going to discuss about three scenarios here for three different types of SaaS there are. So, one SaaS is, let's say, which is just starting out. There's another SaaS who has just discovered their product market fit. And there's the third SaaS, which is, they have just crossed their go-to-market stage. So, and we're going to talk about, how inside sales and outside sales are different and, which is better at what stage of what scenario of these SaaS companies. So, let's start with a company who's just SaaS company, which has just started out. So what should they go with? What's their best thing to do? Is there inside sales or is there outside sales?
I have no idea. But this is why, because I don't know who you're targeting, right? So
Okay.
obviously if I have a contextual conversation with someone, they're like, hey, this is our ICP, this is our
Mhm.
ACV, this is where we're
Right.
looking to grow. Then I can be like, I can give you the exact answer. But
Right.
because there's so many people probably listening on this podcast right now, I don't have the exact answer. I'll give you a
Right.
couple insights on what I would do, right? So
Hmm.
if let's say if I have a company that has 3 to 5 month sales cycle, most likely I might not be doing an outside sales, right? Because when you think of outside sales, they probably have
Hmm.
longer sales cycles, like at 8 to 12 months. That means that they probably have to continuously meet with that person to make sure they can accelerate that deal. If it's 3 to 5 months or it's a 90 to 120 days, you're actually wasting money by sending people to do outside sales because your company is growing and you're not even in that enterprise realm yet. So you're actually more so focused on an S&B mid-market model for success. So in that, I would say you're really going to be focusing on inside sales mostly first. And if I'm just starting out from that sales perspective, I'm definitely going to look at other competitors that are in the space, and then I just go after their clients. That's what I would do, honestly. I'd create a list, go look at their clients, look at their customer portfolios, and then I'd create a list off that in LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and then I would start running and seeing who has differentiating points. Is their client, is that customer meeting their expectations, right? And then move from there. And then it moves, and then also if they have a product market fit, then they probably have some customers. Then you probably have a good baseline understanding. And then at that point, you're probably going to get some people who are outside sales. But again, it depends on how upmarket you're trying to go and also your sales cycle length. And then also that last one you mentioned is, what was that last question you asked there?
For a company who is into, a growth market stage, that's the
Growth
third
market stage.
scenario. Yeah.
Okay, third scenario, growth market stage. Okay, cool. So at that point, that's probably where you probably will have some people who are remote, and I consider them outside sales at this point because they're pretty much on their own, and they pretty much have probably the budget. They probably got hired in from an experience standpoint, and they have the budget to go meet these people face to face. Which is, if I'm on a remote rep, that's what I would do. Because essentially, like, I'm a full sales cycle rep, and I do a lot of inside sales, but I still have an option to do remote. Like, I have the option to go meet people face to face, which we all know. If you meet someone face to face, that conversation is a lot easier than that inside sales that we talked about at the beginning. So I know that was broke those answers down, but from a contextual standpoint, it's very hard for me to answer that question without understanding where they're trying to go, because there could be a company that's like starting out and they're like, we only want to go after enterprise. Then they probably only have outside reps, maybe, right? So it all depends. Yeah.
Right. And let's say, in this thing, let's give this thing a more context. So for example, Slack just did their IPO, right? So, just take Slack as an example, Slack as a SaaS example for this scenario. So, when they were just starting out, so, I think they did a lot of outside sales is what I've heard of and what I've read of. They were going out in companies, and the words, like the marketing was done a lot of through word of mouth. And so what would have been the best case for Slack in terms of inside sale versus outside sale, a tool like Slack?
It's hard to tell you that because that was the IPO, so they did the right thing. So
yeah, I know.
So I don't know. I don't know what else advice I could give Slack. Obviously, they did well, right?
No, but let's take a tool like Slack into consideration. What if might never know, if they had done inside sales, and they might have done IPO much sooner. That might have been the case too.
Yeah, so I mean, I know that they've just now been developing inside sales. I mean, in that model, what they did is a lot of it was word of mouth, from what my understanding was, and they did a ton of great brand marketing. So I think with that, such a good brand marketing, they could have inserted inside sales in a different way. Like, if again, I don't know their model to a T, so obviously my advice is just based on what I'm seeing from the outside. But from my understanding, it would have been probably a little bit interesting if they would have done maybe an earlier model, because they're probably getting a ton of inbound from word of mouth. But if they would have done that SDR, BDR model and just fed outside reps and just like telling them where to go, and then those outside reps have their territories and they just make those rounds on the face-to-face basis, I think that would have been very unique and interesting. If they didn't do that, or they did, cool. But I think that would be interesting if they had, okay, we're having SDR, BDRs, outside and inside sales teams, right? So SDR, BDRs go to events and the marketing teams with them. Inside sales team, they do their regular calls and emails. And then all the other reps are just outside sales reps, just meeting people on site and then just amplifying on top of that. I think that would be an interesting model if they didn't do that or did do it, but I think that'd be pretty cool.
Awesome. And, I agree with the point that, you cannot determine, what a SaaS should do in whatever stage they are without knowing a lot of their background, niche, what's their revenue, what's their sales cycle, and, what segment they're targeting, but still, Prakhar, I'd like to know from your perspective, what should a SaaS company in these three stages would have done, depending on whatever niche they are, or, from your experience, what would you say?
Right. I think a large bit of that has been covered by Morgan already, but bringing more contextuality by, I'd look at two things. One is the sort of product you have. If it's a product-led growth model that the company wishes to achieve with somebody like a Slack or this conferencing system that we're using right now, Zoom, right? So these companies start small in, basically, an organization where a group of people start using it, and the word of mouth, what Morgan rightly highlighted, is the one that is contagious, which actually takes it across teams and then turns it into an enterprise sort of a deal. So I think in these sort of cases, it completely depends. I think a lot depends on the product. A lot depends on the sales cycle, of course, because if you have a low ticket size product at $99, you can never afford an outside team, right? I mean, an outside sales team is going to cost you much higher budget. They're going to be, expensing large amounts on their lunch and learn sessions, etc., which at that sort of price point for a product, you'll never be able to afford as a company and grow. So that's important. I think also what is important is what industry are you selling to and the buyer persona are you selling to. So in terms of, if you're selling to technology companies in general, companies like Amazon, Facebook, and you're in that space, it's very different when you compare it to a manufacturing company where, some other companies are more traditional. And then also depends on if you're selling it to an IT buyer versus a functional buyer who's a business person, right? So, a lot of factors actually could change the entire game of, what model may work. I think Morgan rightly highlighted, the advice that he suggested of what Slack would have ideally done. I would go with that as well. And in fact, that's exactly what we do today at WhatFix as well, right? It's a hybrid model. So we have a mix of inside sales versus outside sales. So, your SDRs open up the conversations. You probably do some of the sessions remote. And then if there's a requirement, then you add that face-to-face to it as well to make it more appealing. So,
Awesome.
Completely from one stage to another is what I would say.
Awesome. And then, Morgan, just like Prakhar highlighted that, there's a good balance between inside sales and outside sales that a company is doing. As they're growing, they should have that same balance grow as well, right? One tip, one weights the other one over, then, it can fall apart, I guess. So, how do you think, a company should balance, what are the factors that a company should look at when they're, balancing inside and outside sales?
I would say ultimately, I think it goes back to the factors that we talked about is what are the expectations as a whole? So if they've gotten a C round funding, how fast is revenue looking to grow, right? What's the SDR to AE model? Is it a 1.25 to 1? Is it a 2 to 1? Whatever that is. So I think when growing it, I think it's the expectations of who do we want to meet and then mapping out how many, like it's reverse engineering, like the equation of, okay, how many meetings do we need to get or how many business do we need to close from an outside sales perspective? And then we need to map how many reps are to that. So that would be my advice there is come up with a formula of what the revenue we're trying to hit. Okay, how many outside sales reps need to happen for that? Then that's when you should program that as well.
Awesome. And what's your take on this, Prakhar? I mean, you've been doing great thing at WhatFix, and how is WhatFix balancing inside sales and outside sales?
Yeah, from our perspective, I think Morgan stated this earlier as well that until it's a requirement of a must-have face-to-face, some really large ticket sizes have been sold with inside sales model itself, where we have pitched to customers that we would like to meet you, but because the entire world and the ecosystem is moving towards inside sales, nobody really wants to meet you because they want to save you some travel time, plus they want to save themselves some time as well. Plus, in an enterprise sale, when you're making, it's not that you're just talking to one stakeholder. You're probably talking to a team who is spread across the entire nation or probably globally. Now, anyway, if you go and meet a couple of folks, it's not going to influence the other four because they're anyway not there. So, tying those things together and sort of maintaining a balance in terms of just looking at, when you're actually analyzing a deal or when SaaS companies are actually selling, you have to look at which particular deals do require a face-to-face touch in terms of, the organization itself, how do they typically make purchases, etc. And that I think is a key component in terms of if you want to meet or not. So I don't want to take names here because, it's a podcast where our listeners are viewing. So any company calling them conservative won't be right on my part, but you can easily figure out who are some of the traditional buyers versus modern buyers.
Awesome. And, so Prakhar, there's this question which is coming to me, which is what are some problems which are faced, by inside sales and what are some problems which are faced by the outside sales? I mean, you have done both, so you might know, what are the typical problems which are faced?
Yeah, well, inside sales, I think the biggest one is, you being ghosted. You did everything right. You got the requirement. You think you were top notch. Your product demonstration was awesome. Hit the spot and then nothing. You just hear nothing from the spot. and you can't do much about it. You're trying to call, you don't want to be a pest as well. So you're trying to find that perfect
Yep.
borderline between being persistent but not being a pain. And in attempts of doing that, a lot of times you get ghosted. I think in outside sales, the worst that has happened to me is that I was on a run once where I was covering 6 cities in 8 days, and it was on the East Coast. And a couple of my meetings, one in New Jersey, another one is in DC, and these two were, a day and the next day. So right after, both of them get canceled because of different reasons. So, a lot of time and, money can actually get wasted when you're on the run. And, these things definitely arise because this happens in inside sales as well, but doesn't hurt you so much because one prospect cancels the meeting, you go on to another, you pick up the phone and start again, right? In a face-to-face sort of scenario, you can't unfortunately do that because your entire plan or the setup of the entire trip is now set up in a particular way. So yeah, that could happen. I mean, top two things that I could probably think of.
Awesome. So Morgan, this makes me think of two scenarios, okay? One in inside and one in outside sales. So in inside sales, an SDR is making calls throughout his day, right? And, he makes like say 20, 25, 30 calls and, no one picks up or there's like no one shows up. But, then there's that 31st call, and then he, by in all these 30 calls, he's already frustrated and, he's in some different mindset and he's seeing a pattern that no one is picking up. And the 31st caller picks up and so how should an SDR tackle this, because he's in some different mentality, and I'm sure he's been disheartened probably, or he's just gone crazy that 30 of my calls wasn't picked up and the 31st one did. So how should an SDR tackle this scenario? I mean, I think you're the best person to answer.
So Sunil, first of all, he's taken aback. Oh my God, he picked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first started as a rep, I was the same way. I mean, I did not like cold calling at all. It's kind of funny because like the whole thing was just like, all right, no one's answering the phone. Like, why am I making cold calls? This is a waste of time. So yeah, I essentially call that the value vomit is what I call it. Because what ends up happening is you finally get someone on the phone. You're not prepared. You say some random thing that you learned during training. And then now you can't get the meeting because that person was like, I don't know what you said. The best way to prepare for that is to make sure that you have a formula in place. A lot of people don't have a process in place. They just are like treating it as an event. So like, I got to make cold calls a day. So hopefully someone or no one answers, and whatever I say, I hope they like, so I can get a meeting. That's the worst way to go about it. So the way to set yourself up for success is, one, practice cold calling with your other coworkers, reps, leaders. It doesn't matter. That's going to actually prepare you to be on this call, because you got to think about it. Just like with anything, people practice to get good at things. People don't just show up. Like, I'll use cricket. It's a great example, right? People don't just go out and just play cricket and they're amazing. They practice before they go get on the field. So why aren't we doing the same thing with cold calls?
Awesome. Yeah.
And so you have to have that cold call with that rep in order to be successful, to make sure you don't value vomit. And also at the same time, you got to come with the process and formula. Like, people go play cricket. They know this is how am I going to pitch? This is how I'm going to hit. And most people don't know, once they get up to the plate of actually getting a prospect on the phone, they don't know what they're going to say. That's like someone going to the cricket and be like, I forgot how to hit. Like, okay, that person's not going to be on the team very long. The same thing has to be a cold call. You got to figure out what's your intro, what's your attention grabber, your value prop, and then also say to him, what is that close statement you have to make? So in that's what's going to make you more effective. And that's how you not do the, oh my gosh, someone I got on the phone today. You're always prepared because you know what you need to say.
Awesome. And the second scenario which comes to me is from Prakhar's experience, which he mentioned just right now. So let's say you're into outbound sales and you're traveling from the west coast to the east coast for a meeting, and you travel there, you arrive at the east coast, let's say New York, and you found out that the meeting is cancelled due to some emergency for any reason. So how do the outside sales guy handle this scenario, because he's already traveled from west coast to east coast. He spent time, he spent money there, and then he has to travel back again to the west coast. So how should a sales guy handle this scenario?
I've dealt with this scenario before. So,
I mean all sales things. Yeah.
I had a meeting set. So here's the thing. This is important. And I got this piece of advice because every time I think about it now, it makes sense. Like, don't just set one meeting and then go for that just one meeting. Like
Mm-hmm.
set multiple things in place, because if one thing falls off, at least you're like, okay, cool, I got something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the precedent. Like, don't be like, I'm going to come from San Francisco to New York for one meeting. Like, make sure that you set, even if it's like hanging out with a friend or maybe it's whatever, you just set that up. So that's my whole ethos. And so that goes into the answer to the question, which is how do I make sure that doesn't affect me? I set other meetings in place. So I tell people, hey, I'm going to be in this area, and maybe it's a client. Maybe it's not even a person that's going to be buy business for me. It's someone that already has my business. So meet with that client, say, hey, how is the product going? How's the solution going? Right? And then maybe asking for maybe a referral or one or two in that area. So, hey, you might have missed out on that big ticket meeting, but now you met with the client and they gave you two other people to meet with, maybe that same day. Maybe during that lunch that you meet with them, they bring two other people that are now prospects. So don't just lean in and be like, I'm going to go here for this one meeting. Find other meetings that stack up with that so you maximize your time, because you're already going there. You might as well meet with other people there as well. And then also just look at your LinkedIn network or whatever you have and see who else is going to be in the area and reach out to them. Maybe you haven't connected with somebody. Maybe there's someone else in the area that's in your sales role, and you can maybe get quick lunch with them, best practices that then lead into, right, another conversation, and they actually can refer you to someone else. So maximize your time when you're somewhere. That's how I make sure to do that. But let's say for the scenario that I scheduled nothing, right, and I don't have any meetings, and that was my only meeting, that's when you just need to go in places where you can network with people. Find out, maybe is there an event that day? Is there somewhere else you can go? Is there someone else you can talk to? Email real quick, go to their office, and just maybe they can show you around, and maybe you can meet with someone. Just be very adaptable in situations and make adjustments. Don't be tied to your schedule, and if it all falls, then just you falter. Like, be adjustable in the process.
Awesome. And that's kind of bring us to the end of this episode. But there's one last thing I'd like to ask both of you. Let's say you both are amazing SDRs as well. So what's your first line when you pick up? When someone picks up, what's the first line that you mention? That apart, like something cool.
So I do. Same call Bob. Hi, Bob. Thanks for taking my call. Do you have a few moments? I lead with curiosity. I don't lead with my name. So in that, the innate human nature is to respond with who are you, and in them responding with who are you, then I can dive into that and like really talk about the stuff that I want to talk to them about. So by doing that, it sets me up for success to do my value prop.
Awesome. And what about you, Prakhar? Is there any trick that you follow, or yeah?
Yeah, and any trick that you follow can only last so long, I feel, because it's picked up by a lot of folks and then is outdated. You have to keep coming up with new ones. I think one of the ones I can think of that has always worked a lot for me is because I used to get a lot of cold calls, so I could relate. I would just go with, hey, thanks, Chris. Thanks for taking my call, and you weren't expecting my call, but I just need a minute of your time to talk about something very interesting, just something on those lines.
Yep.
Be more human in the way to just tell them, hey, you weren't expecting my call. So they know it's a cold call. It obviously is. And they'll leave from there. So usually, people respond. Sometimes I hear a giggle and, it just, lightens the mood, and then I can take it forward from there. But yeah, it's been very mixed, to be honest.
Awesome. That's amazing, guys. I mean, that this has been a very insightful conversation with both of you. Thanks a lot, Morgan, for taking time, and thanks a lot for doing this. Thanks a lot, Prakhar, as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Sunil. Pleasure, guys.
Awesome. Peace out.
Take care. Yeah.
Yeah.